I love the fact that our primary image that we draw from St. Augustine for our diocese is this heart that we see held in the hand of our statue, the heart on this mitre, on some of the vestments that we use to capture this notion of the restless heart of St. Augustine. It certainly calls to mind images of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, but that pierced heart captures the idea that Augustine was this restless man until he came into contact finally, or was willing to accept the invitation of the Lord to let his restless heart be settled, to rest by allowing his heart to be claimed by Jesus himself. But as powerful as the moment of conversion was, as powerful as it is to accept that we should turn our hearts over to Jesus, well, we still have a life to live. And no doubt that from that moment, Augustine had to work through many ways to live the rest that his heart awakened to in that moment. Now, I think the reading for our evening prayer tonight gives us a good way to describe what a heart that rests in God is like. Because it gives us, first of all, the notion of wisdom. Wisdom as conveyed in the Scriptures, telling us that when we see things, when we live in reality as God lives, then we come into contact with wisdom. But this description goes on to talk about the kind of wisdom that should affect our actual lives. Wisdom from above is, first of all, innocent. Then it goes on to say it is peaceable, lenient, docile, rich in sympathy, and rich in the kindly deeds that are its fruit. It is impartial and sincere. That's a beautiful description of what a heart that rests in God looks like. But I imagine tonight we could all do a little bit of an examination of conscience and take that list. How well does my life reflect those qualities that are described? We are here tonight to honor this great saint, and of course the best way to honor him is to imitate the virtues that he held dear. So we should reflect on what it means for us to have this heart that rests in God. In the end, it tells us in this passage, the harvest of justice is sown in peace for those who cultivate peace. My own reflection on the life of St. Augustine leading up to this year's feast revolved around a quote that Augustine would give later in his life to describe what peace really means. He describes peace as tranquility in order. In writing about the city of God, he tells us peace is tranquility in order. Well, this can help us to grasp the reality of peace in our own lives. Peace is something that our world longs for. Peace is something that we search for and find to often be much more elusive than we would wish. But I think part of the reason peace seems so elusive in our lives is that we don't really know what we mean when we say the word itself. Too often, when we talk about, well, what does peace mean? We talk about an absence. Peace as an absence of war, an end to conflict. But the kind of peace that comes from God is not something that's missing. It's something real, something present. And so we can be free of conflicts and still struggle with why do our restless hearts continue? Because we're falling short of the notion of peace. Now, if you ask people, well, what would it look like for you to have peace in your life? We tend quickly to imagine a kind of carefree life. To say, if I didn't have the burden of my responsibilities, if I could set aside all of the things that weigh me down, well, then I'd be at peace. But that's still to reflect on it as an absence of something. When St. Augustine tells us that peace really means tranquility in order, It means that the only way we will have a heart that rests in God, the only way we will have peace, the only way we will have tranquility is when we allow our lives to be ordered in the right way. Only when God is first, and only when our priorities after that are in order, only then will we know peace. Because sometimes we get these moments where we can kind of turn away from our responsibilities. But then we fill up those moments with things that just divert our attention, but they don't actually draw us into the life of God. And if we divert our attention from our responsibilities, we will not discover peace, because peace can only be found when our life is rightly ordered with God. When this is happening in our lives, well, then we can discover a kind of peace that doesn't have to be free of responsibility. It doesn't have to turn away from the burdens of our lives, but can discover God precisely in those moments. Because when we understand tranquility in order, well, then we look at our lives lived well, and we find ourselves cooperating with God. And when we cooperate with God, we discover a richer peace, a heart that is not restless, because it does not rest away from our burdens, but it rests truly in God. One way to make this comparison is to think about some of the days of our life where at the end of the day we find ourselves very tired. I imagine something we can imagine very easily. Plenty of days where we end tired. But there are different kinds of being tired at the end of the day. Imagine a kind of tired where you know that the way you spent your energy that day accomplished a great deal of good. Where we know that we did exactly what we set out to do. And so we are tired, but we look back and say, that was a day well spent. That was a day worth the effort that I put into it. Compare that to a day where we were carrying a burden that we wish we didn't have to carry. There are certainly days like that where we just have to make it through. And when we do, that exhaustion feels different. And so when we compare what it's like to be tired because of a day well spent versus to be tired because of a day that was mostly wasted, we see the difference between a peace as just an absence and peace as tranquility in order. And so as we celebrate this feast of St. Augustine today, we pray that the restless heart that draws us to him can be satisfied in the way that he discovered satisfaction, the way that he discovered rest in God, because he sought after the things that put him into contact with God. He worked for the kind of wisdom that would allow his life to be peaceable and lenient and docile and rich in sympathy and kindly deeds. In living that well, he no doubt spent a great deal of energy. But it was in spending that energy with God that he lived his life in order and came to know the tranquility of a truly restful heart. And so we ask his intercession that we who so often feel the struggle of a restless heart may seek to put our lives in order and know what it truly feels like to live tranquility in order.